Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Sherrone Moore, Michigan, continuing to work their way through fall camp. And the buzz around some of the players on this roster is getting a little bit too loud to ignore. Now, I wasn't even planning on talking any Michigan football today, but many of y'all know any chance I get to talk Michigan ball, I'm certainly going to take it. I want to focus our discussion on the offensive line. If you were to rank the storylines for Michigan going into 2025, number one, and it ain't even close, is Bryce Underwood in the quarterback battle and what the quarterback play looks like for Michigan going into 2025. A very close second. As much as the national media wants to talk about the pass catchers on the outside, which is a very important storyline for Michigan as well, to me, it starts up front. I mean, we know everything we've heard about Bryce Underwood is that he is well talented enough to come in as a true freshman and win a lot of football games. I think the bigger question mark is not only what's around Bryce Underwood, but how do we let this kid settle in to being a starter in the Big Ten as a true freshman? To me, it starts with, hey, keeping him clean up front, but also running the football. We know damn well we got the running backs to do so. Is the offensive line going to be a weapon? Is it going to be good enough for us to lean on and get the run game going into 2025? We're still trying to figure out what the five-man rotation is going to be. Do we have a potential surprise starter for Michigan up front? Very similar to 12 months ago as Dominic Adis, kind of just exploded into the starting center job, and he didn't really hold it for the rest of the year, but emerged during fall camp. Very similar storyline for left tackle Blake Frasier. Going into fall camp, you heard the buzz around Blake Frasier. I didn't necessarily buy into it all that much. It sounds very real. Grant Newsome got in front of the media yesterday and said, hey, we got three guys battling it out to start at left tackle: Evan Link, true freshman Andrew Babaloa, and Blake Frasier. We spent a lot of time talking about Link. We spent a lot of time talking about Babs. I don't think we've talked any Blake Frasier since he committed to Michigan a couple of years ago. Might be time to revisit what he can be for Michigan at the starting left tackle spot and what it would mean for the rest of the starting five, because I think you might see some shakeups if Blake Frasier does emerge as the starter. Now, before we get into it, I'll be very clear. I would be surprised if Blake Frazier is our starting left tackle, but I think it's probably worth getting into the conversation. Before we get into it, as always, the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys. And man, y'all know, as a Michigan fan, it's been so fun talking this football team. The amount of support from the Michigan fans has been absolutely unreal. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it now. Let's just talk about Blake Frasier, get to know Blake Frasier a little bit. Four-star prospect out of Texas in the 2024 class. Redshirted last year, had dealt with some injuries, but more importantly, just needed to change the body a little bit. 6'5", 270 pounds as he enrolled to Michigan. Really good length, really polished individual when it comes to offensive tackle play. Just needed to put some more sand in the pants, needed to fill out that frame. He's up to around 300 pounds going into year two. Here's the question mark I have about Blake Frasier. Is he big enough and physically imposing enough to start on this offensive line? Going back to me thinking the run game is such a big storyline for Michigan in 2025, can we count on Blake Frasier to meaningfully move people off the line of scrimmage and be a weapon in the run game? Because I look at Blake Frasier in pass protection and say, look, really, really good athlete with really good feet, nice coordination. I don't have any question marks about Blake Frasier as a pass protector. I have the question marks about the physicality that he brings, and can he move people in the run game? I will say this: he's sometimes we equate just raw size to power. That's not necessarily the best way to do it. Blake Frasier was a pretty powerful kid coming out of high school. Threw a little bit, shot put and discus, had some really good numbers. You saw the power on the film. Just if you're 270 pounds or 290 pounds, it's even if you're really powerful, it's hard to move bodies off the line of scrimmage. Something to monitor with Blake Frasier. And I think it gives Michigan more answers. And this is one of the things that gives me the underlying confidence that this offensive line will be better in 2025 than it was in 2024 is, one, we have a lot of guys who are returning that played some significant football in 2024, which matters because it was very clear that these guys were still getting their feet wet in the 2024 year. But more importantly, and Grant Newsom talked about this, the depth is really, really good. And I think there's probably 8, 9, 10 guys that Michigan trusts to play quality football in the Big Ten in 2025. That matters because that number was probably at 6 or 7 last year, and 7 might be generous. Here's the other question that I'll kind of throw out there. If Blake Frasier does, or Andrew Babaloa for that matter, if one of those two young cats wins the starting left tackle job, what does Michigan do with Evan Link? I don't think he's playing right tackles. I think Andrew Sprague has cemented himself as the starting right tackle for Michigan going into 2025. The reviews on that kid have been amazing. Does he potentially factor in as that right guard competition? And that right guard competition is still trying to iron itself out. I think we know Kripp is starting at center. I think we know Giovanni El-Hadi starting at left guard. Sprague starting at right tackle. If Evan Link does not win the starting left tackle job, does he factor in the right guard competition? We've heard good things about Nate Afobe. We've heard some sneaky good things about Jake Quinhara getting some work at right guard as well. That's another interesting storyline to monitor. The other thing I'll say with the offensive line is Giovanni El-Hadi and Greg Crippen. They've sounded like they've taken that step. I think both players were, and they'd probably tell you this too, maybe a little relatively disappointing in 2024. Guys that have been marinating in the program didn't necessarily hit the ground running to start 2025. It sounds like both of them that added some good weight are a little bit more ready, have taken that step going into 2025, which is good because if they hadn't taken that step, you'd probably be hearing about competitions at center and left guard as well. Specifically Giovanni El-Hadi, a guy that I've always really liked at Michigan. When he was not necessarily a starter, but played in a rotational manner, I always thought it was pretty good. It just didn't really match up to what we saw in 2024. Gained about 15 to 20 really quality pounds in the offseason. Lou Esposito was actually the one that he was talking about defensive line. He said Giovanni El-Hadi is a guy that we've had trouble going up against in fall camp. That's what you want to hear from a guy like Gio going into year 5. Underlying confidence that this offensive line can take a step. And it's interesting to see Blake Frasier getting some legitimate buzz as a potential starting left tackle for Michigan. Hey, I think Michigan's got maybe 4 tackles that they trust to play quality football in 2025 with Evan Link, Sprague, Babs, and Blake Frasier. It's a good number to be. We talk fall camp for a lot of different programs that are trying to find 2 tackles they trust. I think Michigan might have 4, which I think is good if you're a Michigan fan going into 2025. Another question real quick. Are we sleeping on UMass wide receiver transfer Anthony Simpson? We might be. In Samaj Morgan, I don't know if y'all, I'm sure many of y'all follow the Michigan Twitter page. Samaj Morgan made a very, very nice catch in one of the highlights that we got to see. Not saying that that's indicative of anything, just kind of noting it. What intrigues me about Anthony Simpson? His yards after the catch ability. And what even is more important is Coach Kasula, he knows Anthony Simpson. He coached him at UMass in 2023, where Anthony Simpson had over 95 targets, almost went for 1,000 yards. The value that Anthony Simpson brings is how electric he is with the football in his hands, which goes back to one of the general conversations we've had around Michigan's offense going into 2025. We need more difference makers on the outside, not only in terms of winning vertically down the field. We think we found that with a guy like Donovan McCulley. Who are the guys that we can get the football to in space that can manufacture explosive plays? Going back to the conversation we had about Bryce Underwood, how can we make Bryce's job easy as a freshman? Well, if you have guys that are difference makers with the football in their hands, though, we can scheme up some easy stuff for Bryce and let our playmakers do the rest on the outside. I'm not getting up here and saying Anthony Simpson is going to be a first-team all Big Ten caliber wide receiver. I think there's not as much polish to his game as I think there needs to be. But in terms of a difference maker with the football in his hands, I think we know Samaj Morgan maybe can provide that. Can Anthony Simpson play a role as well? Yeah, we're hearing some good things, and we'll kind of see what it looks like in 2025. But we're looking for guys that feel like we put so much stress on winning vertically down the field and having big body wide receivers that can go make plays. That's important. as you get those kind of wide receivers, guess what else starts opening up a little bit? Some of the stuff underneath. A little bit more space gets created underneath. Can we have guys like Samaj Morgan or a guy like Anthony Simpson take advantage of some of the space with the football in their hands? Chip Lindsey's really good at doing this. He's really, really good at getting his playmakers the football in space. Do we have the playmakers to go make plays with the football in space? Anthony Simpson could be one of them. Last thing that I'll quickly, two more things, and I promise I'll be quick. TJ Guy taking the next step, and we've talked a decent amount about TJ Guy. Lou Esposito, Grant Newsom both got up there and very complimentary of the step that TJ Guy has taken. TJ Guy went from a guy that was very, very solid for Michigan in 2024. In fact, he's probably just downright underappreciated at times. Can he take that step and be like a first or second team all Big Ten caliber guy, future top 75 NFL draft pick? We know Derek Moore's that guy on one side. Derek Moore probably going to get the superstar treatment. And TJ Guy is probably going to get a lot of opportunity in some ideal situations. Can he take advantage of that, not only in the pass rush, but can he be a little bit more present against the run, take the step as a run defender? One of the big conversations that Wink Martindale talked about, Lou Esposito talked about yesterday was we got to find a different engine to this Michigan defense. Last year, the engine was Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, and also a guy like Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore on the outside, but really it was KG and Mason Graham. That's not saying the interior defensive line is going to be bad, right? I think you brought in Trey Williams to be a very, very steady force, along with a guy like Damon Payne. We're hoping Rayshon Benny can take that step in year 5, but I think it's many Michigan fans who followed this program and appreciate what Mason Graham and KG were probably understand that we're not going to be as good at that position, which is okay. Now the storyline is, all right, who is going to replace that disruption in production? Wink Martindale talks about it all the time is, look, I got to be a defensive coordinator that identifies our best football players, says, hey, we're not going to scheme just to scheme. We're going to use our scheme to put our best football players in opportunities to really dominate. And instead of scheming around Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant on the inside, you're scheming around TJ Guy and Derek Moore, but also using the linebackers as weapons a little bit. I think Martindale came out and said that at some point during the spring is, hey, last year our defense went through Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, and rightfully so. They're two of the more dominant football players in the sport. This year, our defense, from a playmaking standpoint, from a production and disruption standpoint, it's got to go through some other guys. I think that's why they brought in a guy like Trey Williams. Trey Williams, 6'2", 320 pounds, not necessarily a gap shooter and penetrator. He's a freaking fire hydrant, though. Low pads, big body, eating up double teams, which allows your linebackers to play a little bit more clean, play a little bit more downhill when you have a real tree stump up there up front. Can we scheme it up for Ernest Hausman? Can we scheme it up for Jayshon Barham? That seems to be a talking point that every coach talks about is, hey, how can we allow Jayshon Barham to go from good to great? He had a big impact on Michigan's defense last year. Can it be an elite impact in 2025? That's the goal of the Wink Martindale defense. How can we put a guy like Jayshon Barham or a guy like Derek Moore, TJ Guy, Ernest Hausman? How can we put those guys, our best football players, in spots to dominate football games? That's been the clear talking point, and that's kind of what gives me optimism to not really expect a drop off on defense. Is we're not replacing Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. There's no replacing those two. They're some of the best players that we've seen at Michigan over the last couple of decades. Find the other guys. Find the new engine of the defense. I think these linebackers and these edge rushers are going to be those guys. Really, really fun talk. It's crazy because I feel like we haven't even talked that much about Bryce Underwood during fall camp. It's been about what are some of the other pieces on this Michigan team. And we going to need that if Michigan wants to do what they expect to do in 2025. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. I again, wasn't even really planning to talk some Michigan football. We went 15 minutes. I got some stuff to get off my chest. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.